Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on Cowboy Story, we ride the stories of the West, campfire truths, trail dust, memories, saloon whispers. Gritty human, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. Tin plate last scrape of beans, a metallic rasp in a room that has learned to hold its breath. Jack Hollis sits at a rough table with one chair and a lantern that smokes when the wind leans on the seams. He looks 35 and tired in the bones. The Mesilla Basin is outside his door, a pale bowl of hard earth and winter light. The Sacramento Range lifts in a dark spine to the north. The cabin is half a promise, one room finished, the second a ribcage of studs and warped planks. His hands are split at the knuckles. The water in the bucket tastes like coins. The well gave him alkali all autumn. The fence posts lean. The mule sleeps with one ear up. Wolves talk out there when the sun lets go. He keeps the Winchester on two nails by the door. He does not keep company. The wind moans down the arroyo like it has business. Cold is inside the wood today. He stands, plates the lamp with a palm to quiet the rattle, and checks the rope he strung from his porch to the barn. The rope is stiff sand in the fibers, a lifeline for whiteouts and pride. He slides it through his fingers. Splinters bite. He likes the bite. It means the world still answers back. Something rides the wind that is not sage or old smoke from his own stove. It hits faint and sharp, then slips away. He lifts his head and tastes the air again. Mesquite dust, an ash note that does not belong to him. He takes the rifle. He buttons his coat at the throat and steps onto the porch. The boards knock once under his boots. He hears the rope hum in the gust like a tight string. Sleet pecks at his cheekbones. The sky has gone the color of dirty pewter. A storm gathers its shoulders. He moves along the rope hand over hand boots, finding the packed path by memory more than sight. The barn squats in the fold of the ground, low and stubborn. He slows, lets his breathing find a quiet. The world is noise, then a pause, then the softest scrape. He stops. They are there pressed against the lee wall of the barn, 5 shapes the size of hunger. Cloth is wet black against their legs. Hair clings to cheeks. They do not look up. They hold themselves in a knot, shoulder to shoulder, the wind peeling at the fringe of their dresses. Bare feet show under the hems, red and bluish at the toes. He brings the Winchester to the pocket of his shoulder. The hammer clicks into place and sounds louder than a shot. The shapes flinch, then go still again. "Stay put," he says. His voice has rust in it. One of them lifts her chin. She is small and wired tight. Her eyes carry the heat. A broken knife sits in her fist. The blade is a jagged tooth, nothing more, but her hand knows it like a promise. He watches the rocks, watches the door gap. Nothing moves except the sleet and the old cedar by the corral shaking its hands at the sky. He does a slow circle with his eyes, lets his breath go thin, tastes for more men on the wind. No saddle creak, no iron jingle, just the 5 and the weather. "Where are your men?" he asks. No answer. The smallest one coughs. It is a dry, tearing sound that pulls the nerves in his chest like wire. He feels a phantom weight in his arms, a fever-hot child he carried once up the ridge to where the wind does not quit. He keeps the rifle level and looks at the dirt between his boots. He could turn. He could pull his hat down and go back along the rope and bolt the door and let the storm do what storms do. He would last the night. He would last many nights. He has made a life of lasting. He takes one step backward. The small one coughs again. That sound lifts his head and breaks something quiet inside him that he thought winter had frozen shut. He sees a stove made of brick, a tin cup, a small hand. He hears a laugh that he cannot hold on to. He shuts his eyes, then opens them. He lowers the rifle. He does not sling it. He does not pretend he is not afraid. "Cabin," he says. He nods toward the dark square of his porch lantern. Fire. Food. They do not move. The small one's shoulders shake. The scarred woman, tall and still, sets a palm flat against the small one's back like a brace. The one with the knife watches him as if waiting for him to take it back. He does not. He turns and begins to walk the rope toward the light. He does not look over his shoulder. He hears them after a moment. Wet feet drag against frozen ground. Cloth whispers. He keeps moving. On the porch, he pushes his door wide with a forearm and steps off to one side. Warm air rolls out the smell of charred coffee and soap that never rinses clean. They come through one by one. He sees faces now in the lamplight. A woman whose hair is threaded with gray does not meet his eyes. Her hands hold the small one careful. A quick-eyed woman with a thin mouth glances around the room, as if measuring seams. The tall one with the scar that pulls at her left eye scans the corners and the ceiling, and finally the door frame. The small one lowers to the floor by the stove and fights the cough that wrings her. The last to come in is the small leader with the broken knife. She meets him straight and gives nothing back, not fear, not thanks. He bars the door. The board thuds into iron saddles. The five settle in one tight crescent along the wall near the heat. They keep the room at arm's length. He stands with the rifle, then leans it against the logs where he can grab it without looking. He crouches at the woodpile, feeds 2 splits to the stove, and closes the iron mouth. The roar levels into a steady breath. He goes to the cupboard and sets out what he has that can be spared. Hard bread that cracks when it dries. Jerky. 5 tin cups. He fills them at the bucket. The water is cold enough to bite teeth. He lays the food and cups on the floor in a line halfway between the stove and his table. He uses the toe of his boot to nudge the nearest cup an inch closer to them. It feels like offering a hand while holding back his wrist. He returns to his chair and sits. He rests his palms on his knees. He keeps his shoulders loose by thinking about it. The gray-haired one looks at the small one. The small one nods once. The gray-haired one takes a piece of bread and puts it in the small one's hands, then takes a cup and tips it. The small one drinks in 3 quick swallows, then coughs until her eyes water. The tall woman with the scar brings the cup back to her mouth and makes her sip slower. The quick-eyed woman sniffs the jerky and mutters a string of words he does not know. The leader flicks her a look. The quick-eyed woman shrugs, rips her piece in half, and eats jaw tight with the habit of going without. Jack puts another split on the fire. He does it slow and makes claws of his fingers so they see them. It feels foolish and necessary. He finds a blanket in the chest. It smells like cedar and a winter that he does not like to remember. He carries it toward the stove. The leader's hand clicks on the broken knife. He stops and sets the blanket on the floor a pace away from the small one. For her, he says, and taps his own chest twice. Cold. The tall woman with the scar lifts the blanket and wraps the small one up in a practiced roll, tuck, and pull. The small one lets her head drop to the wall and closes her eyes for the first time since the door opened. The room becomes a breathing animal. The storm presses the logs and cannot come in. He sees their feet. The soles are cut and caked with mud. He sees dirt lines on their wrists where bracelets used to be. He sees a threadbare dress seam that is neat and careful mended by someone who respects cloth. He sees the broken knife. He sees the leader's hands, knuckles rubbed raw, tendons like wire. The knife blade is not much, but the way she holds it is everything. He clears his throat and wishes he had not. "You understand me," he says. He touches his chest. "Jack." No one speaks. The gray-haired woman looks at the leader. The leader keeps those black eyes on Jack. Then she speaks one word low and flat. "Ada." It feels like a stone set down between them. The others do not offer names. He does not push for them. He nods once. He points at the stove and says the only word that makes sense. "Fire." Ada does not glance over. "Fire," she repeats in his tongue, then in hers softer, as if laying both words side by side to see which one fits their night. Jack draws a breath and feels it all the way. He reaches for the lantern and trims the wick so it will burn steady and not throw smoke. He moves the rifle 2 inches so the barrel does not kiss the hot iron of the stove leg. He checks the rope where it is tied off to a porch post through a chink near the door. He takes the coil end in his hand and feels the weight. The rope has held him in worse than this. Ada watches his hands. The tall woman watches the door. The quick-eyed woman watches his face the way a coyote watches a rider, one blink away from running or biting. The gray-haired woman has her palm on the small one's forehead and whispers words that are not for him. The wind finds a new seam and cries there. He hears sleep begin to turn to a soft hiss. The cabin smells like wet wool old coffee and mesquite smoke. He sits where he can see all of them without turning his head. He does not touch the rifle. He does not take off his boots. He thinks of the ridge where the crosses are. He thinks of the fort he walked away from with a horse and a sickness in his eyes. He thinks of the rope between the porch and the barn and how a line can be a boundary or a bridge. He opens his palms and lets the heat work on the ache. No one sleeps, not yet. The stove ticks as it settles. The small one breathes in a thin rattle that eases after a while. The quick-eyed woman slides the cups back across the floor, with 2 fingers setting them in a neat row in his shadow. The gray-haired woman folds the empty food cloth and puts it where he took it from, without asking. The tall woman sits with her back to the wall and does not blink. Jack stands and drops the bar across the door. The sound lands clean in the room. The wind hits the logs one more time and goes on. The fire holds. So do they. He takes the chair back. The rope trembles in its knot. 5 strangers watch him from the stove's glow. He watches them back. 4 pairs of hands lie quiet on ragged cloth. One hand keeps a broken knife ready. The night decides to stay. Morning filters in as a pale smear. The window goes milk-white frost feathering the edges. The stove ticks. The cabin is a held breath, with heat pooled near iron and cold parked in the corners. Jack wakes stiff in the chair. He does not remember closing his eyes. Ada sits where she sat, a shadow with a blade that used to be a knife. Ruth, the gray-haired one, has a palm on the small one's forehead. Cass watches Jack like a coyote watches a corral gate. Nora keeps her face to the door and listens to the wind like it is talking only to her. Lila curls under the blanket, eyes half-open, breath, a thin rasp with a catch at the end. Jack sets water to boil. The kettle sings a thin metal note. He measures coffee with a patient hand and lets the smell rise dark and bitter. He pours 1 cup and slides it along the floor with his fingertips toward Ada. She studies the steam. She looks at him, then at the others, a small shake of her head. Jack takes the cup back and drinks. He does not push. He points to the woodpile. Wood, he says. He taps the bucket. Water. He touches his chest. Jack. Ada touches the stove with the back of a knuckle and says, "Fire." She tips her chin toward him. Jack. The word lands clean. She says something brief in her own tongue to Ruth. The shape of it sounds like stone and river. Snow starts a soft hiss against the logs. Light dims from gray to pewter. Jack stands and checks the rope that runs through the chink near the doorpost. He tugs it and feels the anchor bite the porch beam. The rope hums under wind like a low fiddle string. He wraps a hitch he likes better and sets the coil so a blind hand can find it. Splinters prickle his palm. He leaves them. He feeds the fire with 2 more splits. He keeps his movements slow, palms open, fingers visible. The quick-eyed one, Cass, watches his wrists. He sees the flicker of a reaction when he lifts the lid on the pot, and the smell of beans and salt pork reaches them, thin but sharp. Cass mutters a few clipped words in her language. Ada does not turn her head. Cass closes her mouth and looks at the wall as if it said something back. Ruth eases Lila up tips water, then eases her down again. The blanket makes a small sigh as it settles. A cough racks the girl, dry, then wet. The sound pulls a line through Jack that he does not know how to loosen. Jack kneels near the chest and pulls another blanket thinner than the first. He carries it like a flag of truce and sets it within reach. Ada's fingers shift on the broken knife, then rest again. Ruth takes the blanket without looking at him. She folds it under Lila's knees and tucks the corners with the clean economy of a woman who has done this more times than can be counted. Nora rises without a word. She finds the broom by the door. She sweeps the tracked-in sleet and grit toward the threshold strokes of the straw, short and exact. The room changes by degrees, not warmer but more ordered. The sound of the broom bristles is steady as rain on canvas. Jack lays 5 thin slices of bread and 5 strips of jerky on a cloth and sets it at the border between them. He cuts smaller pieces before they reach for anything. He pours water again. He drinks last. The jerky is hard enough to fight the teeth. The bread is all edges. It is a meal anyway. He tries a word again, pointing. Cup. Ruth says it back in a careful way, then says a word in her tongue and touches Lila's temple. Ada listens to that word. Burning, she says in English, searching for the shape. She is burning. Jack reaches. He stops his hand in the air where all of them can see it. He sets the back of his fingers to the girl's forehead. Heat rolls off her skin. His fingertips remember a different small brow that burned and went out. The room tilts a little. He pulls his hand back and stands. The storm lays its shoulder into the walls. The window goes from milk to bone. The door shifts once in its frame and holds. Jack crosses to the hinge and sets the bar deeper into the iron saddles. He checks the lantern trims. The wick wipes the sooty glass with a square of cloth. The flame steadies and hums. He goes to the porch and opens the door into a wall of white. The wind hits his face like cold sand. He steps out onto the boards for 2 breaths and tightens the knot on the porch post. The rail creaks. The outermost board has a hairline crack from last freeze. He fingers the split and leaves it be. His fingertips come away with a ghost of ice. Back inside, the air feels dense and hot. The kettle hisses softly in the counterpoint to the wind. Cass gets to her feet, touches Jack's sleeve with 2 fingers. She tips her head at the skillet, then at the jerked meat. A wrinkle of nose, not unkind, only honest. Jack gives the pan. She digs in a small pouch and sprinkles a dark pinch into the beans. A bitter, piney smell rises and fills the corner of the room. He makes himself step to one side and watch from there. Ruth sits by the stove with a needle and thread Jack knows from his mending kit. She works on the torn cuff of a shirt he ruined hauling wet cedar. Tiny, perfect stitches march along the seam, the thread wet with spit to keep the end hard. Her hands are cracked. The nails are short. Her knuckles look like pebbles under skin. She does not look up from the work and does not ask. She finishes the last stitch and bites the thread. The cuff looks like it was always whole. Jack finds his breath where he left it. He takes the shirt and nods once. "Thank you," he says, not sure if it is the right moment for language. Ruth folds her hands in her lap. She looks past him to Lila, then to Ada. Ada's eyes have turned dull with worry. She sits forward, all the heat of her focus on the girl. The day grinds down. The room learns the shapes of bodies. Jack leaves the rifle leaning against the log near the stove leg, not between them. The distance is not large, but he feels its weight. He can reach the gun. They can reach the stove. It is a kind of treaty. Snow races past the window. The light is so thin it is almost sound. The wolves are quiet. Even the mule is quiet. The wind makes the rope sing and then growl. In the hush between gusts, Jack hears Lila breathe. The hitch in it counts time. He tries to offer coffee again, this time to Ruth. She looks to Ada. Ada looks to Lila. Ruth shakes her head. Cass takes the cup, smells it, sips, and coughs once, as if the taste pulled a memory that had dust on it. She keeps the cup and takes another small sip this time, with a little smile that is more teeth than lips. Nora tests the latch on the door and sets her palm on the wood, feeling the pressure of the storm through the grain like a pulse. She goes to the window, wipes a circle with the heel of her hand, and watches the whiteness jump and swirl. Her scar tugs at the corner of her mouth and eye, in a way that makes it hard to tell where she is looking. Jack thinks she sees in several directions at once. Night arrives without much difference from afternoon. He feeds the fire and watches the flame climb, then settle. He cuts more bread. The kettle empties to a hiss and refill. Every small sound has a place. Ada shifts Lila and hums a low line that might be a tune. The words are not for sharing. They are a rope you only tie around your own heart. The room warms and then stales. Jack opens the door a crack for one breath, then two, to let the smoke creep out and clean air slide in. A gust throws sleet at his cheek. He shuts the door and bars it. His fingers feel thick. He rubs them together until feeling stings back. Lila coughs, and the cough turns into a tight, rickety fit. Her shoulders shake. She gasps and fights for air and cannot get enough. Ruth lifts her. Ada braces with both arms. Nora gets water and holds the cup against Lila's lip. A thin dribble slides down her chin. The girl's eyes lose focus, then find it again. Her skin burns through the blanket. Jack stands with his hands empty. He feels useless and heavy. He sets the palms on the table and leans down until wood answers his forehead with a touch that could be cool or simply not hot. He straightens, fills every cup again, because there is one thing he can do that is not a mistake. He puts the cups where they can be reached. He sets a damp folded cloth on the floor by Ruth, without speaking. Ruth takes it and lays it across Lila's brow. Ada looks at him, and there is no defiance there, only the blaze of someone holding back a door with both shoulders. "Jack," she says. It is not a question and not a thank you. It sits in the air with the smell of beans and the iron heat. Wind presses its full hand on the cabin. The rope thrums. The fire breathes. Jack pulls the chair closer to the stove and sits where the warmth can climb into his bones. He keeps his eyes on Lila's face, on the place where the pulse beats in the hollow of her throat. The night stretches. It does not break. He waits with them and lets the storm speak. By afternoon, the window is a solid sheet of milk. The wind finds a new seam and keens there. Heat sits close to the stove. Cold owns the floorboards. Lila shakes under the blanket. Her lips look too pale. Ruth lifts her palms, sure voice a thread of sound you feel more than hear. Ada rubs small circles on the girl's back and watches her face like it is a map that keeps changing. Cass checks the pot and adds another pinch from her pouch. The smell turns dark and green, a bitter edge that rides over the beans. Jack kneels. He touches the inside of Lila's wrist. The pulse hammers. He feels heat rise off her skin the way heat rises off a kettle. He knows this heat. The room tilts the way it did when a small hand let go of his in a winter that never ended. Ada looks up. Her eyes are dull with not sleeping. "Burning," she says, and sets the back of her hand to Lila's brow again, as if the word alone might push the fever down. Jack stands. He goes to the peg by the door and pulls his coat down. The lining sticks where it is torn. He shakes ice dust from the sleeve. He takes the buffalo hide mittens from a nail, checks the rope through the chink, and ties it around his waist with a mule hitch he could tie blind. He checks the Winchester and leaves it by the door. He will not need a rifle for snow. Ada rises fast, the broken knife in her fist, as if he were taking something. Where, she says. The one word bites. Dry gulch, he says. Quinine, liniment. He taps the air as if the words could turn into bottles. I come back. Ada's mouth goes hard. She looks at Ruth, then at Lila. She does not step out of his way. Her chin lifts. Storm, she says. Storm, he agrees and puts a palm flat on the bar at the door. He lifts it. The wood moans. Cass reaches into a crate, pulls a flask with a cork, and shoves it at his chest. Whiskey, she says. Inside for heat, not outside. He nods once. Nora stands by the door, already pulling it open, as if she can muscle the wind aside for him. It hits all of them like a thrown fist. The room exhales heat in one long gasp. Jack steps into white. The porch boards knock under his boots. Sleet needles his cheeks. The rope hums in his hands. He goes hand over hand to the barn. The world is a blank page and an angry pen. The barn door shudders under his shoulders. He drags it open, catches it again before the wind tears it off the rail. The mule rolls an eye at him, whites wide. It smells like hay and fear. He gets the saddle on with fingers that do not feel like his. The cinch bites true. He talks to the animal with the voice you use for work you have to do. Easy, Jack says. He has said that name to himself for 2 years. He says it to the mule now, and it steadies the both of them. He pulls the scarf up over his mouth. He tucks the small flask into his inner pocket and buttons it against his skin. He ties the rope from his waist to the barn post and then cuts it with his knife, so it trails a tale for a man who could get lost and never be found. He mounts. The mule sets its head down and leans into the white like a boat into river chop. There is no horizon. There is only push and pull ice in the lashes, wind hard enough to steal breath. Snow knifes sideways. The sound is a steady hiss, and then a roar, and then a hiss again. Jack keeps the mule's shoulder lined with the broken cottonwood he knows sits at the turn, though he cannot see it. He trusts hooves more than eyes. The beast knows where the ground gives. Twice the mule stumbles to its knees and lunges back up, grunting through teeth. Once Jack goes off, lands on his side, the cold slamming into him like a plank. He cannot find his feet at first. The world is a white bowl, tipped and spinning slow. He crawls, catches the stirrup, and hauls himself up, with a curse that comes out a puff of steam. He presses his chest to the animal's neck for a count of 10, takes the heat he can, then pushes on. Time quits meaning much. Hours or minutes are the same size. His cheeks burn and then go numb. His fingers are rocks inside mittens. He keeps the mule moving, and the mule keeps him breathing. The basin falls away in places, and he guesses at the angles. He loses the line once and circles until the wind shifts a smell into his face that is not sage. It is smoke, not his smoke. Resinous and sour, pine mixed with lamp oil. He rides toward it like a dog to a whistle. The door at Dry Gulch bangs back on its hinges when he hits it with his shoulder. For a second he is deaf to his own noise. Then sound slams back in. A stove pops. A clock ticks. Boots scrape on plank. A man's face appears above a shotgun muzzle. Holy God, the man says, lowering the gun. You got the devil on your back, Hollis. Dodd, Jack says. His mouth feels thick. His voice is a rasp of sand. Quinine. Liniment. Now. Efish Dodd blinks twice and moves. He knows the look in Jack's eyes. He hustles behind the counter, pulls a small brown bottle from a high shelf and another from a low. The cork stinks of medicine. He slides the bottles across, then pulls a sack. You want coffee too, you idiot, he says, but it carries no heat. Flour. Salt. Jack fumbles at his coat. His fingers cannot find the pocket. Dodd reaches across and opens the buttons, fishes out the money roll for him, counts by feel. Jack stops him with a hand on the counter and shakes his head. He reaches instead into an inner pocket and brings up a small, folded cloth bundle. Inside is a beaver pelt cured years ago, the fur still bright. Dodd's eyebrows make a long climb. He knows what such a pelt means in a place like this. You sure, Dodd says, gentler than a trader ought to be? Jack nods once. He sets the pelt down. Dodd wraps the bottles in paper and tucks them into Jack's inner coat deep and close. He adds a twist of willow bark for pain and does not say he is adding it. He pulls the flask from Jack's pocket, uncorks it, and pushes it at Jack's mouth. "Sip," he says. "Not a hero. The cold is in your blood." Whiskey hits like fire and opens the world a notch. Jack stows the flask and turns. He does not stay to warm his hands. He does not trust what time is doing right now. Outside is worse. Snow has deepened to the knee in the street cut. The mule fights right away and wins. Jack rides the smell of his own sweat in the scarf. He keeps the bottles under his coat with a flat palm, as if holding them in place could hold a life in place. The trip back is a smear of white and shadow. The wind lifts the world and sets it down wrong. He goes off the mule once more, and this time the snow feels soft in a dangerous way. He lies there a breath too long, and the white presses on him like sleep. The mule swings its head and blows hot air into his ear. He laughs once, a dry crack that is not a laugh, and climbs up because there is still a rope tied around his waist because the knot tells him who he is when names do not. The porch is a black square that blooms out of nothing. He misses the first step and crawls up the second. He grips the latch, misses it, hits the door with his shoulder instead. It gives. He falls forward into heat and light and hands. The shock of warm air is a knife. Pain rushes into his fingers and toes like a fire laid raw. He curses and would be ashamed if he had room in him for anything more than the pain. Nora and Ruth pull at his coat. Cass drags the mittens off. Ada takes one bottle from inside his coat and then the other. Jack makes a sound that is more animal than man when the bottle leaves heat. Ada holds it up so he can see it, then tucks it under her own arm to keep it warm, while she helps strip the frozen places from him. They work him onto his cot. His clothes stick to him. They cut what they must. The room smells like wet wool, whiskey, and iron. Ruth rubs his hands hard with cloths heated on the stove lid, then cools the rubbing when he bites down on a groan. Cass lifts his head and tips the flask to his lip. It burns bright and opens another inch of air in his chest. Nora wraps his feet in a borrowed blanket and tucks it under the corners neat. Ado opens the quinine bottle with her teeth and spits the cork. She mixes a pinch in water and slides her palm under Lila's neck. Ruth steadies the girl's head. The cup touches Lila's mouth. Ada talks to her in a voice Jack has not heard from her. It is low and easy and holds no edges. Lila swallows, coughs, swallows again. A line of medicine runs free down her chin. Ruth wipes it quick with a fold of cloth. Ada feeds her more patient and relentless. Jack stares at the ceiling until the rope stops ringing in his ears. Heat pounds in his fingers. His cheeks prickle and then ache. He lets his head fall to the side and sees Ada's hand on the girl's hair, Ruth's hand on the girl's wrist, Nora's hands rolling a blanket tight, hands everywhere, doing clean work. He finds his own hand on the rough edge of the cot and makes a fist because he can. The wind goes from fury to a steady roar to a long, tired exhale. The window pane fogs and clears in slow cycles. The stove breath is a heartbeat. Lila sleeps. Her forehead is still hot under Ruth's palm, but the heat has a different kind now, less like fire, more like a stove left too high. The sound of her breathing evens enough that the room hears it and lets its own breath settle. Jack sleeps without knowing he started. He wakes to a dull ache in everything, and the smell of herbs he does not have a name for. The lamp has been turned down. A new log has burned halfway to coal. Someone has mended his torn coat lining. The stitches are small and straight. He lifts the edge and sees the neat path of the thread, a road back to usefulness. Ada is sitting with her back to the wall. Her eyes are closed. The broken knife lies across her thigh. Ruth's chin is on her chest, the needle still strung and looped over the first knuckle, as if she fell asleep between one stitch and the next. Nora has her hand on the door. Cass is a shape under a blanket near the hearth. Lila turns once and breathes out a long, slow line that sounds like mercy. Jack looks down at his hand and finds a different hand resting on it. He follows it up to a forearm with scars like small white commas and then to Ada's wrist. He can feel his pulse under her palm. He can feel hers, too. He does not move. He lets the shared beat knock the night into order. The rope at the wall is slack. The wind is still inside the logs now. Snow ticks from the eaves. The world is smaller, and for a moment enough. The day does not so much begin as unclench. The wind sleeps in short bursts. Snow slides off the eaves in soft, wet sheets. The window is a chalk circle with a thumbprint wiped in the middle. Lila's skin still holds heat, but the hard burn has stepped back. She lies under the blanket with a damp cloth tucked along her hairline. Ruth measures breath with her own palm cupped at the girl's throat, counting without thinking. Cass stirs the pot, and lets the beans whisper around a bowl. Nora sits near the door with a broom and her stillness. Ada watches, elbows on knees, hands linked, like she has tied herself to the moment to make it hold. Jack trims the lamp wick, then settles on the floor with a scrap of cottonwood. He keeps his knife close to the grain. Chips fall in curls that catch light and smell sweet. A bird comes out of the block a little at a time, not pretty, just sure. He drills a small hole through the top with a heated nail and sanded string. His fingers remember how to make something that does not argue. When the coffee lifts, he pours 1 cup and sets it by the stove. Cass takes it without looking up and mutters something short that might be thanks. Ruth touches the cup with 2 fingers and keeps her focus on Lila. The steam fogs her knuckles. The room holds steady. A scrape sounds outside. Leather complains. Iron rings against iron. Nora's head tilts. The broom stops mid-stroke. Ada is already on her feet, one hand sliding to the broken knife, as if magnet in iron. Jack stands and puts the bird in his pocket. He takes the Winchester from the wall and sets it behind the wood box where his hand knows the path. He looks at Ada, then at the stove. She understands. She guides Ruth and Lila to the far side of the heat and pulls the blanket higher. Cass blows the lamp down to a dusk that still shows a face, but not a corner. A fist thumps the door twice. No hurry in it, no kindness either. Jack lifts the bar. He cracks the door and leans his shoulder into the frame so his body is the view. Cold rushes his knees and throat. 2 horses steam out there, flanks wet and dark. A sergeant sits one. The man beside him wears a second-hand blue coat and eyes that do not blink enough. "Morning," the older one says. His voice is dry leather and dust. "Morning," Jack says. His voice is flat and carries to the porch rail and no farther. "Lieutenant Mercer," the man says as if handing a card. He taps his breast with 2 fingers. "We are riding for Fort Larkspur. Heard there were strays out this way. You seen anybody, not you?" Jack lets his breath show white and slow. "Storm took the road. You can see what I seen. White and fence posts." The younger man lifts his chin and sniffs. He peers past Jack like he might thread himself through a keyhole. "Smells like more than a man's supper," he says. "Smells like herbs. Smells like women." Jack keeps his eyes on Mercer. "I cook with what I have," he says. "Beans taste like rope without something green." Mercer lets his gaze slide to the porch rail. He notices the hairline split in the outer board, and the way a nail sits a breath higher than its brothers. He notices that Jack's coat is torn and mended with small stitches a man does not often make for himself. His eyes drift back to Jack's face. He works his jaw once. "You were a scout," Mercer says. For a while." "For a while," Jack says. "You ran," the younger man says, like flicking a fly. Mercer does not turn his head, but something in his mouth tightens. "You watch your tongue." "Corwin," he says soft. He looks at Jack again. "We saw smoke last night. Not yours. Could be raiders cooking what they took. Could be a trap fire. If you see anything, 3 shots will bring a patrol." "I know the signal," Jack says. Mercer lets his eyes go past Jack one more time. He takes in the 1 chair and the rough table, the iron stove, the shadow of a broom, a line of tin cups dried and stacked. He sees the rope end through the chink in the wall. He hears the wind press and the logs answer. He lifts the reins. "Hard winter," he says to the air, and touches his heels to the horse. The horses turn. The snow squeaks under hooves and then swallows sound. The door shuts on a last curl of cold. The bar drops into iron with a low ring that hangs for a moment. Ada breathes out. Ruth eases her hand from Lila's throat and sets it on the girl's chest instead, light as moth wings. Cass snorts once, a dry sound that could be a laugh, eaten before it finds shape. Nora stands with her palm flat on the door a beat longer than she needs. Then she picks up the broom and starts the floor where she left off. Jack closes his eyes and opens them. He slides the rifle back up on its nails where it lives, then rethinks. He takes it down and sets it by the rear window, the small square that looks toward the sump and the thorn. He angles the barrel so it does not touch iron. He lifts the latch on the window and sets it so a hard push will open it on the first try. Ada watches him do it and says nothing. Her face is not made for easy, but there is a soft place at the edge of her mouth that was not there yesterday. She crosses back to Lila and sets her hand on the girl's hair. The line of her shoulders drops a little. The broken knife sits easy against her leg. The day fades without moving much. Snow thins to ragged flurries. The roof drips through the last of the icings. Jack sits with the cottonwood in his lap and takes the bird out of the block the rest of the way. He sands it smooth with a bit of pot shard wrapped in cloth. He rubs a smear of bacon grease into the grain with his thumb to bring the color up. The thing looks like a bird that made it through one winter and will try for another. He stands with it and crosses to Ruth. He holds it out awkward as a boy at a stranger's door. For the stitches, he says. Ruth looks at his hand, then at his face, then at the small carving. She takes it between finger and thumb. She turns it once and finds the hole through the top. Her mouth does not change, but something behind her eyes does. She lifts the bird to her throat and holds it there, then lets it fall into her palm. She reaches up, puts her hand on his shoulder, and rises onto her toes. Her lips touch his. It is a kiss that does not ask. It states a fact. Warmth is still possible. She steps back and sits. She ties the bird on a scrap of string and settles it at the hollow of her throat like an answer. Ada sees it all from the corner of her eye. She does not change shape. She straightens the blanket around Lila with more care than is required. Cass stirs the pot without looking up and smiles into the steam where no one can see it. Nora nods once, as if a rule has been set and accepted. The stove breathes a steady hum. The room smells like beans, pennyroyal wet wool, and lamp smoke. Jack steps out to the porch to spit the taste of surprise into the snow, then crouches and runs his thumb along the split rail. He worries the nail a half turn with a pocket blade. It sits high now, easy to give if a boot or shoulder finds it. He straightens, tests the rope on the post, and comes back inside. Night finds them awake in the same arrangement, only easier in their bodies. Lila sleeps without the hard catch. Ada keeps the blade close and her eyes half closed. Ruth's breath goes deep and regular. Cass sits with one knee up and hums part of a tune she will not sing. Nora finishes the floor, leans the broom, and takes first watch by the door, without saying she will. Jack sets the rifle by the small window and lowers the lamp. He sits on the edge of his cot and listens to the drip outside, slow to a count he could keep if he had to. He touches the stitched cuff with 2 fingers. The thread is smooth under skin. He lets his hand fall to his chest and feels the beat there, steady as the stove. The cabin holds the heat. The rope hangs slack where it ties through the wall. The wind sulks and gives up for a while. They do not speak of the visit. They do not speak of the kiss. They keep their places and share the air. The storm unwinds itself across 2 gray mornings. The roof drips. The yard turns to a skin of ice with mud underneath. Lila sleeps hard and wakes in small, thirsty sips. Ruth hums low when she thinks no one hears. Cass hangs strips of meat by the stove and watches the grease bead. Nora checks tracks near the arroyo, then erases them with a cedar branch. Ada walks the fence line with a coil of wire and a mind elsewhere. Jack follows her with a jar of cut nails and his temper tucked under his tongue. The posts lean like tired men. The top wire sings in the wind and then falls quiet. "You tied this wrong," Ada says, tapping a square knot with the broken knife hilt. The knot sits fat against a weathered post. "That knot holds," Jack says. "It holds your pride," she says, "not the fence." He takes the pliers from her and reties the wire with a figure 8. She watches his hands. He hears the judgment and the challenge and wants to win both. The wire bites his palm and he lets it. When he steps back, the run is clean again. Ada gives it one pull, then lets go. "The row too close," she says, nodding at the patch of earth behind the cabin, where snow has thinned and dirt shows its ribs. "This is thin land," Jack says. "If I spread rows, nothing fills. Corn stands for bean," Ada says. "Bean feeds corn. You waste if you do not listen." She taps the earth with the knife as if testing if it is ready to hear her. Jack wants to say he knows land. He wants to say he knows how to live with it without being loved back. Instead, he checks the gate hinge and hears his voice harden. "I am trying to keep you alive," he says. Ada looks at him, and the look is not unkind. It is exact. "We keep us," she says, and walks the line palm flat on each post like a priest touching a pew. Inside, heat feels thin. Jack scrubs his hands at the basin and watches the water cloud. Ruth threads a needle and slides it through a tear in a saddle blanket. Cass crushes dried leaves in a small mortar with the back of a spoon. Nora rolls a rawhide thong between her fingers until it is tight and glossy, then hooks it to her belt. Jack sits by the hearth and stares at the ash. It hangs in small islands on ember. He pokes it. The islands fold and glow and then die back. The cabin closes in. He hears his own breath and hates how it sounds. Night lays down heavy. The stove ticks. Lila turns in her sleep and murmurs a name that belongs to someone gone. Ruth tucks the blanket higher against her chin. Ada stands at the open door and tastes the air, then bars it and sits with her back to the wood. Jack lies down and stays awake. Every small sound has edges. He feels the rope through the chink with his palm and thinks of White and push, and how the knot told him he was still here. It does not help now. The air around his chest is tight. His thoughts churn and bite. He gets up and stares at the door to the night, then at the line of sleeping shapes. He does not want to be inside his own head. Cass is awake by the banked coals. Her eyes catch the red and hold it. She sharpens a small blade on a smooth river stone. The scrape is regular. She does not look at him. He sits on his cot and then stands. He crosses the room because standing hurts worse than moving. He stops by the hearth. Cass does not lift her gaze. He reaches for the little knife and she lets him take it. He draws the edge on the stone without looking. The room feels too small and too warm. He hands the knife back. Cass sets the blade aside and rests her palm on his knee. No words, no promise, no bargain. A door that opens not to love, not to safety, only to a short dark without thought. Jack lowers not from want, but from hunger for quiet. He does not kiss her. He does not speak. Cloth whispers. The floor is hard. Their breath fills the small space and then empties it. When it is done, the quiet is different. It is not better. Morning is iron. Cass rises first, pulls her blanket up, and ties her hair back. She looks at him once with a face that gives nothing away. Ruth pours water from the kettle and hums the same one line. Nora sets a pot outside to catch snowmelt. Lila's breath is even. Ada stands at the basin with her palms braced on either side. Her head is bowed. The broken knife sits on the shelf above her, its snapped edge bright. Jack comes near and tastes copper in his mouth. He opens it and closes it. Ada turns. Her face is clean of expression. She crosses the room in 3 strides and slaps him. It is not a half slap. Her palm lands full on his jaw and cheek and rings in his ear. The sound is as sharp as a gunshot in a barn. His head turns with it. Heat floods his skin. He tastes blood at the gum. He stands there and lets his eyes find a knot in the log wall. He does not lift a hand to his cheek. He does not ask to be heard. Ada's breath comes hard once. She puts both hands on the table and leans into them, the muscles at the base of her thumb jumping. She turns away. Her shoulders shudder once barely. She picks up the knife and slides it back into the loop at her belt. She does not look back at him. Ruth comes to him and sets the back of her fingers at the red mark on his face. Her touch is cool. Her voice is matter-of-fact and soft at once. "Do not use warmth to make a hole," she says. "Not in this house. If you make us cold, we do not mend." Jack lowers his eyes. "I know," he says. The words are dry. He does not know what to do with his hands. The day turns to chores because work is the only language that insists on an answer. Jack takes the mule to the creek for water. Cass gathers sage and pennyroyal in a small sack. Nora checks the far ridge and comes back with a new way to hide a fire's smoke. Ruth takes apart a shirt he ruined months ago and finds 3 good pockets in it. Ada walks the garden space with a stick and draws rows that bend and then straighten. By noon, Jack hears wheels, not iron on rock, wood on frozen mud. The sound arrives before dust or a voice. He looks at Ada. Her mouth has gone thin again. She jerks her head. Inside, she says to Ruth and Lila. Cass slides through the trapdoor with the grace of a cat and pulls Ruth down beside her. Lila obeys Ruth's hand without waking all the way. Nora does not move. She is in the barn with the mule, and the creak of leather says the animal needed a cinch checked now and not later. The wagon rolls into view, a plank box on tired axles with a swayback mule, and a man wrapped in a greasy coat and a bowler hat that has seen too much rain. He lifts a hand like a neighbor. His smile is too many teeth. "Howdy," he says. "Jed Rollins, dry goods and goodwill." Jack steps onto the porch and keeps the door at his shoulder. "Not buying much," he says. He holds the rifle behind his leg in a way that is more habit than warning. Jed stands and the trace's hands spread, as if to show he carries only trade and talk. "I got salt," he says. "Flour. Coffee if you forgot how it tastes. Cartridges if you like coyotes to stay polite." Salt pulls hard at Jack. The barrel is a crust at the bottom. Flour is low. Cartridges are precious and countable on 2 hands. He keeps his face the same shape anyway. "What do you take?" he asks. Pelt's Jed says. "Beaver if you got it. Coyote if you must." His eyes roam the porch. His gaze lingers on a shirt sleeve hung on the line. The cuff is mended with a tidy path of tiny stitches. He tips his head. "That is not a bachelor stitch," he says, light as a poke. Jack does not look at the line. "I mend fine enough," he says. Jed's eyes slide past him toward the dark square of the cabin. Jack shifts half a step and fills more of the doorway. Jed laughs and lifts both palms again as if the air itself were a witness. Jack goes to the barn. He thinks of pelts he kept too long because they were from a time he did not want to touch. He finds 3 beaver prepared in a better season. He carries them to the porch, the fur dense and heavy as memory. Jed's eyes brighten in a way he tries to hide and fails. "I can do you salt and flour and a box of 44s, Jed says quick with numbers, with a smile that sours the sum. Jack knows it is a bad trade and makes it anyway, because need is hard math. He takes the sack of salt, the sack of flour, the cartridges, and sets them on the boards. He feels rawhide cut into his palm and does not adjust his grip. They are loading the goods when Nora steps out from the shadow of the barn. She is wiping her hands on a rag, unhurried eyes on the mule's flank first, then up. Her scar catches the light. She freezes. She does not reach for a weapon. The moment is a still thin thread stretched tight between breath and no breath. Jed's smile dies. His eyes narrow and glitter. The quick sum in his head is not about salt. He looks at Nora's face and then at Jack. He sees the mended cuff on the line again. He sees the rope end in the wall. He puts the picture together in the cheap frame his kind carries. "Seems you got help," he says. The tone is oily. "Hard country for a man alone. I guess you are not." "She works," Jack says. His voice goes very quiet. "That is what you need to know." Jed tips his hat. The gesture is almost polite. "Army pays for strays," he says, as if repeating weather. Fort Larkspur has long memory and short patience. He backs toward the wagons and climbs onto the seat. He clucks to the mule, and the wheels find the ruts like water finds a low place. He rides off with the smile back on his mouth for show, and the calculation still in his eyes for himself. Jack stands with one sack of flour hugged to his chest. He watches the wagon sway away, then drop behind a fold of ground. The tracks scar the mud in 2 long cuts. He goes inside. He lifts the rug and sets his palm on the trap door and leaves it there a heartbeat before he lifts it. Cass squints up into light. Ruth looks past Jack and reads his face. Ada stands by the table with the broken knife resting on her knuckles, like a promise she would rather not keep. Nora comes to the door, wipes her hands again, and meets Jack's eyes without blinking. Nobody says it aloud. The room knows what was just bought at a price. The sacks on the porch feel heavier than grain. The cabin gathers itself smaller around the stove. The rope at the wall is suddenly a line that marks more than weather. Afternoon light goes thin as paper. The wagon tracks have skinned over with ice. No one says the name of the fort. The room moves quieter, as if sound could turn a wheel outside. Ada lays the broken knife on the table and rolls her shoulders. Ruth puts a palm to Lila's cheek and nods once. Cass wraps herbs in a square of cloth and ties it with a wet thread. Nora checks the latch with 2 fingers and leaves her hand there long enough to feel the push of weather through wood. Boots grind on frozen dirt. Harness leather creaks. A horse blows. The sound lands like a stone dropped in a well. Ada's eyes cut to Jack. He lifts the bar and looks back to the stove. Ada is already lifting the rug. Ruth guides Lila to the hole and lowers her. Cass follows with the bundle of herbs and the little lamp turned low. Nora stays where a shadow makes her part of the doorway. Ada points 2 fingers at Jack, then at the floor, then shakes her head. He understands. She is not leaving him to speak alone. Jack steps onto the porch with the rifle held at his side and his hands open. Cold bites the new pink of his cheek where Ada's hand marked him. The yard is a circle of horses and dark coats. A dozen men. Mercer sits easy and looks like a man who wants a reason to move. "Afternoon," Mercer says. "Smoke out here says a different story than the one you told." "Afternoon," Jack says. He keeps his back on the door jamb and his eyes on Mercer's eyes. He makes his breath slow. "Storm kept me. You saw that too." Corwin, the young one, grins like a boy in a fight that is not a fight yet. He rocks his weight. "We smelled something else," he says. "Pennyroyal. That is not a bachelor's spice." Jack does not look toward the window. "Beans are cruel without help," he says. Mercer's gaze drifts to the mended cuff on the line and back. He lets a silence stand long enough to turn heavy. "Army is short of patience," he says. "And long on rope." Jack feels the porch rail at his thigh. He slides a heel behind one loose board and lets his boot brace there. "I hear you," he says. He lifts both hands higher. "I am unarmed." A shot tears the air before the word dies. Heat lances his upper arm and spins him into the doorframe. The slap of it shocks more than the pain. Blood runs warm inside his sleeve. Mercer jerks his reins and snarls, not looking away from Jack. "Hold your fire," he says, and it sounds like a man who liked the sound of the gun anyway. "Send them out." Mercer calls. "We will hang you soft and quick if you make it easy. If not, we smoke you like rats." Inside Ada's mouth is a hard, flat line. She pushes Ruth and Cass and Lila down into dirt and dark and lowers the rug. Quiet, she breathes. Stone quiet. The small lamp goes out with her fingers and a twist. The crawl space smells like dust and potato skins and damp wood. The three hold their breath with their hands on each other's sleeves. Jack stays on the porch with blood sliding toward his wrist. He feels the rail under his hand. He looks at Mercer. He lets his shoulders sag a fraction. He says one thing that buys time because time is a thing he can still pay for. "The mule," he says. "Let me loose him." There is no use burning an animal for nothing. Mercer smiles with half his mouth. "I do not care for your mule," he says. He jerks his chin at a sergeant. The man with the torch steps toward the porch. The torch spits black smoke that stinks of coal oil. Snow takes some of that smoke and throws it back. Jack's heel lifts. He kicks the split rail sideways with a sharp twist. The loose board goes with a crack that sounds like a small tree giving up. The sergeant flinches and swings the torch. Fire licks the porch post and then blows out in a geist. Men laugh because men laugh when a thing slips sideways. Mercer's eyes turn flint. Jack takes the door in both hands and pulls it shut. The bar drops with a sound that feels strong for a breath. Bullets hit the planks and drum through. Window glass goes to sugar. Splinters lift from the wall. The stove shudders. Jack runs for the rear window. The rifle is where he set it. Smoke climbs from the front and rolls along the ceiling like a low tide. The rear latch gives. Cold hits his face. He hears boots on the porch and the rush of men into fire. He hears Mercer's voice go sharp like a sawtooth. He hears the laugh of the young one again. He wonders if he can still climb with one arm. A shadow fills the rear window. A small hand catches his shirt and pulls. Ada's face is a hard shape framed in white that used to be snow and is now steam. "Move," she says. It is not loud. It is iron. "I can climb," he says. He cannot. His left arm is hot and slick. His shoulder does not answer right. Ada shoves him up with her whole body. He gets a knee through, then an elbow. His boot catches and then finds a hold. He tips into the yard and rolls into cold dirt where ashes will be by the hour's end. Ada comes after with the ease that lives in her bones. She slides out and drops soundless. Flames take the front room. Heat pushes at their backs. Smoke turns the world to a thick, sweet sting that coats the mouth. Ada hooks her arm under Jack's good one. "Up," she says. He goes up. He cannot feel his fingers. He can feel the rope through the chink in the wall tug at his ribs like he is still tied to the right choice. He stumbles and finds his feet again. Ada puts her shoulder into his hip and moves him like a post. They do not run for the open ground. They slip along the back wall where the snow has drifted and go for the thorn and mesquite at the edge of the yard. A man steps around the corner with a bayonet and a grin that shows he thinks he has them both potted. Ada lets Jack fall against the wall and goes inside the man's reach. The broken knife is for scraping hides, not fighting, but her hand does not know that. She is a small, fast absence where his gut used to be. He folds and does not finish a sound. She pulls Jack again without changing breath. Voices roar at the front. The fire gulps air and woofs. The porch saturates with light. Bullets hit the back wall and punch splinters into Ada's hair. She does not duck. She counts breath and steps and Jack's weight. They reach the cut of the arroyo. The bank drops to a dark shelf that smells like wet clay and old leaves. Ada lowers Jack and slides down after boots, finding the places men and coyotes both step. She pulls him under a curl of bank where roots make a brown curtain. He lies there and shivers in bursts that hurt his shoulder. Smoke hangs in the throat of the cut. Ash drifts like new snow. The wind throws sparks at the sky and the sky does not answer. Ruth and Cass hold Lila in the dark under the floor and listen to the roar change from outside to inside and back. The heat presses into the wood above them and then eases. Ruth counts Lila's breaths by feeling the lift of her ribs. Cass has the herbs pressed to her face to ride the smoke without choking. They do not speak. They do not move. The small lamp dark in Ruth's hand is heavy for something that does not burn. The commotion rolls toward the barn. Men shout about horses. A torch swings wild. The mule screams. The scream hits Jack where no line of stitching will hold. He closes his eyes and opens them because breath is work now and he has to do it. Nora is not under the floor. She is in the shadows by the paddock, a stillness that makes itself into wood, until a man passes close enough to smell the salt on his neck. He moves careful alone, a tracker who wants to brag later. He does not. Nora's hand is a quiet flash. The knife goes where it knows to go. She holds him until his legs are done telling the ground what to do. She eases him onto his side so the noise of a fall does not travel. She cleans the blade on his coat, as if this is laundry day and all cloth deserves the same fairness. Her eyes stay on the bigger sound until she is sure it is moving away. She slides into the arroyo and drops beside Ada and Jack. Her chest rises and falls without rush. There is a wet streak on her sleeve that does not belong to her. Her face gives back the firelight in a dull, even way. He is not good anymore, she says. It is flat. It is all the explanation she will offer. Ada strips Jack's sleeve and checks the furrow along his arm. Blood is sticky and bright. The cut is clean and angry. She tears a strip from the bottom of her dress and binds it. Her fingers are steady. Ruth arrives with Lila and Cass, eyes wide in the dim. The three drop into the hollow together, bodies touching in small, practical ways that communicate more than breath. Quiet, Ada says. Ruth nods. Cass presses her knuckles to her mouth until she owns the sounds that wan out. Lila stares at the smoke lifting into the sky and then turns her face into Ruth's shoulder. The cabin groans. The roof goes with a long, hungry sigh. Sparks ride up and disappear into falling white. Men laugh and cough and spit whiskey. The smell of coal oil and pine pitch turns to wet ash in the throat. Boots tramp. A man says they will camp and finish the job in the morning. The circle of horses breaks and reforms farther out. Mercer's voice barks once and then fades as if he chose to be heard less. Ada slides her hand under Jack's head and lifts enough to ease his breath. He lets it out and watches her face from the small distance his eyes can make. There is soot on her cheekbone. There is a curl of hair stuck there. Her eyes look not at him but through him, counting the place where men stand and where the dark is deeper. Her palm finds the place between his ribs and hip and stays there, not gentle, not rough, just present. Ash lands soft on the bank's lip and melts into beads. The arroyo holds the five and their heat like a secret. The rope burned at one end where it tied through the wall, but the knot in Jack's middle stays. He closes his eyes and opens them. Breath keeps coming. The night keeps its teeth in. They do not think past this hour. They share the shallow cut in the earth and let it protect as much as it can. The fire above eats the cabin he built and leaves a piece of him in the air. He feels that and keeps breathing. Ada's hand stays on him until his shaking steadies and the orange on the bank goes down to ember. Night folds around the arroyo and holds. When the fire above is low as breath, Ada touches Jack's shoulder and points. They move with the cut of the land, not against it. Snow has crust over mud. Ash sits on it like pepper. The world smells like wet wood and old smoke. Ruth carries Lila with a cloth banded across both their chests, so arms rest. Cass walks light, one hand on the mule's cheek when it spooks at shadows. Nora goes ahead, and then is not there, and then is again a quiet thread that finds the next turn before anyone else sees it. Jack keeps his bad arm close and his good hand on rock. Every time his boot slides, he finds Ada near him, a palm at his elbow or hip, not gentle, only sure. The basin falls away into darker shape. The wind loses its bite inside the rock ribs. Stars open where the cloud breaks. They come to a canyon that breathes its own cold. Walls rise in red and black. A ledge climbs the face in shallow steps, cut by hands that have been dust for a long time. From below, the steps look like teeth in a stone jaw. Nora puts a palm on the first step and looks up until her neck is a line. She nods once. Dry, she says. The word is a gift. They leave the mule, and what meat is left in a pocket of brush hobbled tight, head down, and grateful to be still. Jack ties a rope around his waist and then around Ada's. Cass knots the other end to a cedar root and tests it with her weight. Ruth settles Lila on her hip and ties a scarf across the girl's back, and her own, so there is one body to balance, not two. They climb. Sand whispers under boots. The rope lifts and drops and lifts again, skin hot where it bites. Jack breathes through his teeth. His arm throbs in a rhythm that does not match his feet. He wants to swear and does not because air is for climbing. Halfway up there is an alcove cut deep into the face. Smoke has kissed the rock there sometime in a century that is not this one. Old handprints lift pale from the wall where sun never touches. A trickle of water darkens stone in one corner and drops into a bowl worn smooth by that exact fall. Ruth cups her hands and lets a little pool then tilts it into Lila's mouth. The girl drinks without opening her eyes. They climb again. The steps turn back on themselves and then fetch up in a shelf wide enough for bodies, and the idea of a door. A low room yawns, roof-blackened floor, hard-packed draft taking the smoke up a hidden seam. There are other mouths of rooms farther along and above, some tight, some deep. Nora goes to each with slow feet and a hand extended like a peace offering. She returns and lifts 2 fingers. These she says. They make a small fire that does not show. Nora lays green needles on it and stones over that until the smoke seeps and not billows. The heat hits the cold and holds it off without a brag. Ruth cleans Jack's arm with boiled water and whiskey. The cut is a long kiss of lead and fire clean from a bad angle. Cass unrolls her herbs and works quiet with the paste Lila called bitter and good. Ada holds Jack's wrist with both hands and does not look away while Ruth threads a needle. The first stitch steals his breath. The second organizes pain into a line. He breathes on the third. By the 7th, his jaw unclenches and the room comes back. Ruth ties off the thread with a tooth and a nod. They sleep where sleep finds them. Morning arrives with a blue cold that feels honest. From the shelf they can see the basin below, turn to shine where ice peels back. Smoke from the burned place threads thin along the ground and goes flat. Work starts because work is how to be here. Nora maps the ledges and the places where a foot slips. She shows how to build a fire shallow and low, using the wind's habits to carry smoke along rock and away. Cass bundles dry brush and yucca leaves and carries them up in loads that make her ribs show. Ruth finds a piece of mesquite root and begins to carve it into spoons with a pocket knife that has seen too much tin. The wood smells sweet and stubborn. The spoons begin as block and end as curve that fits a hand. Jack takes rawhide from an old bundle and soaks it and pulls it long and tight, then lashes poles into a frame that leans from stone to stone. Ada tests each lash with both hands until the rawhide sings. They weave yucca across the top, then throw a coat of mud mixed with straw and let sun harden it. The roof becomes shade, and the shade becomes a room. The sound of their work settles into a rhythm that keeps breath even. Lila wakes to the smell of sage and ash and looks at the walls like they have said her name. She sits with her back to cool rock and watches Ruth's hands move. With thread watches Jack teach Cass how to oil the rifle and clean the bore until the cloth comes out pale. Ada leaves and returns with 3 small sacks she found buried under scrap in Jack's ruined chest. She pours a palm of seed into her hand. Corn, bean, squash. The light catches and turns the kernels into little teeth of sun. They find a pocket of dirt on a wide ledge just far enough from the room for wind to do less harm. Jack brings the plow blade by arm instead of mule and cuts shallow. Ada follows behind him and presses seed into place with 2 fingers and a small firm twist. They stand over the rows and argue in low voices about how close is close and how far is far. Jack points. Ada shakes her head. Ruth watches and smiles without showing teeth. Cass leans on the handle and rolls her eyes big for Lila to see. Lila laughs once quiet and lays her palm flat on the dirt for luck. Jack gets the horses up by a side path Nora found with that way she has. The animals take the narrow with a dignity that belongs to them and a terror that does not. He speaks to them soft and they listen because they always have. Cass throws a leg over the dun mare bareback and sticks there by fury and choice. The mare crow hops twice and then tries to leave her behind. Dust hits the cliff and hangs. Cass lands on her back and is up before the laugh finishes, leaving Jack's throat. She gets on again, jaw set, eyes bright. The mare learns her weight in her hands. By noon, the 2 move together. Lila stands next to the mule and touches the coarse neck. She flinches when the animal breathes. Jack takes her wrist and lays her palm flat. Feel him, he says. He is a furnace with legs. He thinks slow. Let him think. The mule flicks an ear and does not step away. Lila leaves her hand there until she stops bracing for a bite. Later, she takes 1 loop around the little rock corral, back stiff fingers white. A small sound escapes her when the mule turns his head to check her, not a cry, something brighter. She does it again because the second time might be a lie if you do not test it. By late day, the room looks like a place people live. A pole holds blankets where wind will dry them. A row of tin cups catches light like small moons. The roof smells like green grass and wet dirt. The fire tastes like coffee instead of smoke. Ruth sets a spoon in Jack's palm that fits as if it grew there. Cass scrubs a pot with sand in a good mood. Nora stands at the mouth of the ledge and watches the long reach of basin and sky. Lila crushes rock against rock and makes color. Red from iron, yellow from crumbly stone that stains everything it touches, black from charcoal. She mixes the dust with sap and a little oil until it moves like thick water. She paints with her fingers at first, then with a stick cut and chewed to a point. The wall takes her touch in layers. She lays down a line for Ruth with threads still between fingers, a curve for Cass with hair blown across her face, a strong upright for Nora back to the world eyes on it anyway, a thin shape for Ada that looks like wind trapped in cotton. Jack comes last, an outline with a hand closed on something he thinks is a rifle and might be a piece of sky. Lila steps back and wipes her fingers on a rag and does not say what she thinks she has done. She looks at the wall like the wall has agreed to remember. Jack sits at the mouth of the room when the light goes soft. The basin shifts to blues and violet. The first cold comes down the rock. He feels the day in his bones in a way that does not shame him. Ada lowers herself beside him with a quiet that is not careful, just present. She leans her shoulder to his and leaves it. He leaves his there too. Not alone, she says. He nods. He lays his hand on the stock of the Winchester out of habit and then lifts Ada's hand and puts it on his chest instead. Her palm is warm. The beat under it is steady and simple. She does not move it away. Ruth's voice carries from inside the room, a low song without words. Cass answers with a short rise that curls back into itself and stops shy of finishing. Nora's silhouette shifts at the edge of the ledge and does not lift a hand to say she hears because she hears. Lila draws a last small mark on the wall and blows on it like cooling soup. The stars show without work. The rope they used for climbing lies coiled neat by the door, dry and ready, in case hands need it again. Ash dusts the stone where the old fire sat, and does not matter here. The night takes them in and keeps them. The canyon keeps its own weather. Morning light pours down in a thin sheet. It catches on the painted wall where Lila's colors have dried to dust and shine. Coffee breathes from the low fire that Nora built, so smoke hugs stone and disappears. A sound threads the mouth of the canyon. Not wheels, not a deer, a foot that knows how to step and leave little. Nora turns her head. Jack feels it in the way her shoulders set. A man appears between the junipers wrapped in a blanket cut from government cloth, bare at the ankles, face the same bones as Nora, with everything else worn thin. He stops when he sees her. He does not move to take the rifle from his shoulder. Nora, he says. Ben, Nora says. They stand with the distance between them like another person. The lines in Nora's face shift, then settle. She walks to him. She sets her palm on his cheek like checking if a child has a fever. He leans his forehead to hers. Neither of them weeps. Jack lowers his rifle. Ada comes to stand at his side without asking what the man wants. Ruth wipes her hands on her skirt and waits with the patience of someone who has watched more reunions in her head than in her life. Cass sidles out of the shadow eyes, alert and bright mouth, a hard line. Lila steps back and sets the brush in a jar as if a splash can wait. Ben eats sitting on his heels with the bowl close and his eyes at the canyon mouth. He chews like a man whose jaw forgot the work for a while and has to learn it again. Between bites, he talks each sentence a small stone. Fort Larkspur, he says. New captain. Name Alden. He does not drink. He does not stop. He glances at Jack with a flick. The peddler tells a story. Gold. Guns. A white scout turned renegade. He knows this basin. The captain believes him. Jack hears a name he can taste. Jeb Rawlins. The salt sack on the porch of the ruin. The smile that never touched the eyes. How many, Ada asks. Many, Ben says. More than a patrol. 30. Maybe more. I count boots and horses from a field away. They test the passes. They ask who trades here. They say ghosts live in red stone. Nora's fingers find the edge of the bowl and rest there. You run long, she says. 3 months, Ben says. Walk, steal, hide in mesquite. Listen under the floor when men sleep. I follow the Chihuahuan Ridge east then north. I look for the shape of home. He finishes the last of the beans, then licks his thumb and wipes a grain from the bowl because hunger teaches manners of a different kind. He lifts his head. They ride, he says. Soon. The word drops into the room and lands on every tool and cup. It sits on the hearthstones and does not slide off. Ruth nods once and stands. Cass tucks her hair back and ties it with rawhide. Lila looks at the wall and then at her hands. She goes to the basket and brings out the stakes she has been cutting from willow shoots for the garden rows and puts them in a new pile without saying what they will be. Work begins not with talk but with hands. Jack walks the south rim with Ben and counts distances with his eye. Loose rock sits where winter left it. The ledge above the canyon mouth holds 3 boulders the size of a mule each balanced close to their edge. Jack tests the ground under them with the heel of his hand. Ben crouches and slips rawhide under the first rock, with the slow care of someone coaxing a snake out of a pot. Together they thread the lash through a notch and tie a hitch that holds when pulled from one side and lets go when a line parts from the other. Ada and Cass drag coils of rope from the room and soak them so the fibers swell, then pull them over a rounded stone to make them slick. Ada braces her feet and leans back with the line around her waist. The rope hums and stretches. Cass stands behind and anchors her with a hand to the hip. Both women lean like a piece of one machine. At the peak of the strain, Ada laughs once short and lets the rope ease. She tests the knot with a fist. It sings. Ruth grindstones a tin of charcoal and yellow into paste. She paints a small mark on the buttstock of each rifle where a cheek will meet wood. A black crescent, a sign you cannot see from a distance that feels like a promise up close. Lila holds the pot steady lip caught in her teeth, the tip of her hair chalked red from rubbing her ear with stained fingers. Nora takes her knife and walks the floor of the canyon, where hooves must come if they come at all. She finds the places where the dust goes deep. She kneels there and presses rawhide loops into the sand. And Gravel drags a sagebrush branch back to wipe the sign clean, then makes the brush look like wind did it. She ties the free ends to roots, to rocks, to old dead things that will not tell. Jack uses the shovel with his good hand and a bad arm that throbs and keeps its own count. He digs shallow pits where smoke will sit low and run in a thin sheet along the ground when lit. He lines them with damp brush so the smoke smells green and confusing. He sets a rock lattice across to hold a handful of ember and signs them with a small curl of pinon so he can find them in bad light. They work until the sun slides and the canyon begins to swallow its own color. Sweat cuts lines through ash on the skin. Every palm has rope bite or grit ground in. They drink from the rock bowl and pass it to the left as if there are rules, and they all remember them. Jack climbs to the south rim again and lies on his stomach in the shallow scrape he made where the stone is pitted and gray. He lays the rifle so the barrel points a finger down the canyon floor. He checks the sight picture and the angle to the mouth and the turn above the pack shelf. He places 3 cartridges where his hand falls without looking. Ruth's black crescent sits cool against his cheek. He breathes in through his nose and out through his mouth, and feels the old work wake up in his chest. It is not the same as it was when he was young and stupid. It is not a thing he wants. It is a tool he knows. Ada climbs up beside him and lies on her side with her head propped on her wrist. She watches the light leave the basin in panels. Her hair smells like sun now, and not like smoke. Jack touches the rope that runs to the boulders and feels the weight of stone waiting. It is a quiet feeling. Ada sets her palm on his shoulder, where Ruth's stitches lie. She kneads once until the muscle lets go around the scar. He breathes easier. Neither of them says what the rope or the stone are for. They know. When the first star shows low, they leave the rim and walk the ledge that cuts along the canyon wall. The rock throws their steps back at them in small echoes. The camp below is a line of cups and tools laid by the door like in any ordinary house. Ruth sits with the painted pot in her lap lids half closed. She dips a finger and makes a tiny mark on Lila's wrist like a secret brace. Cass checks the knots that hold the snare lines and clicks her tongue at a loose one, as if scolding a child, and then fixes it. Nora stands at the edge where the ledge falls to dark. She holds Ben's shoulder once and lets go. Their eyes meet and move apart. Their quiet fills more space than talk might. Jack takes Ada's hand. He does not pull. He does not ask. He leads her to a flat place by the lip where the stone remembers warmth from the day. They sit, and the night moves on around them. He lifts her hair aside and sets his mouth to the place below her ear, where skin is thin, and she tastes like salt and sage. She draws his face to hers and answers without hurry. They lie together under a sky that is full of old light. It is not a fight. It is not a bargain. It is a way of fitting 2 bodies so their breath tracks together and stays steady. Later, she traces the long mark on his chest with a fingertip and listens to his heart from there. "I am not afraid," she says, voice small from the way stone takes sound and keeps it. He kisses her knuckles. "Good," he says. The word is a simple thing they share with the blanket. When they return to the room, the fire is a low red ring. Ruth has set the rifles where hands can find them in the dark. The painted bird at her throat shines when she turns. Cass sleeps with one palm open, fingers curled as if around a line that is not there. Lila's hair is fanned across the blanket streaked with iron dust. Nora sits by the door and looks past it. Ben lies near, back to the wall, eyes slit, not trusting sleep to stay kind. Jack stretches out on his mat. Ada lays down beside him on the side that does not ache. He feels the rawhide burn on his palm start to cool, and the ache in his arm find a lower hum. He closes his eyes to give them both more work tomorrow. The canyon breathes. The rope hugs stone. The marks on the rifles dry to a dull black that will not shine in any light. The night holds. Heat lifts off the red stone in thin waves. The rim smells like sun-warmed dust and iron. Jack lies in his scrape on the south rim with the Winchester settled into the notch his forearm made in the rock. Ruth's black crescent is cool against his cheek. He watches the mouth of the canyon, the ribbon of trail where hooves grind dust to flour. Hoofbeats roll before the riders show. Talk comes first, tossed and careless. A bugle tries a note and gives up. Then blue coats and brass. Captain Alden sits straight in the saddle, clean jaw eyes that do not search, eyes that decide. Beneath him rides Jeb Rollins under that bent bowler hat brim greasy with old weather. Jeb points at the mouth with 2 fingers like a man selling a view. In there he calls voice high to Carrie. Caves and stores and the turncoat. Gold too, if you believe it. The first 6 men take the lead without thinking. Their horses hit the packed dust and the canyon swallows their noise. Alden lifts a hand, and the rest hold by the rockfall's shoulder. He waits head tilted. He is a man who likes to listen to his own plan work. On the shelf above the mouth, Ruth and Lila crouch by the rope tied through the notch under the first boulder. Rawhide is tight as a fiddle string. Lila's fingers are stained red from yesterday's paint. Ruth's palm is steady. They look at each other once. Ruth nods. Lila bites her lip and slides her small knife under the wrap. The rawhide fibers squeal. Ruth cuts clean on the second lash. Rock shifts. A small sound, a groan in stone. Then gravity remembers. The first boulder rolls off its bed and takes the second with it. The third rides over both. Sound comes late and everywhere. A deep thunder that climbs the inside of the canyon and shakes dust loose from old ceilings. Hooves scream. Men shout. The mouth of the canyon fills with sliding red and gray, a plug jammed hard. The first 6 are inside with the echo and the fear. Alden jerks his horse back, face turned up to the rim. He cannot see anyone. He turns to Jeb and says something Jack cannot hear. Jeb's smile tries to stick and fails. He looks smaller on the horse all of a sudden. Jack does not fire. He waits. Sound settles into a hot ring. Dust hangs. Then Ada moves. She is below a low shape in the cut. Cass to her right, Ben to her left. Smoke crawls out of the shallow pits Jack dug and slides along the ground like fog that forgot to be cold. Horses snort and stamp. A soldier raises a rifle into that moving gray and fires into nothing. The bullet snaps rock near Jack's face and chips sting his cheek. He blinks and keeps the sight where he set it. Cass goes first fast between 2 chest-high rocks, rifle tucked tight, shoulders low. She fires twice without stopping. The first shot takes a man at the knee. The second finds another man when he stands to see what happened to his friend. Ben is a shadow with a bow arrows, moving like thought. He places one under a jaw where a collar leaves a soft square. The man folds like a hooked fish. Ada does not shoot. She is the knife and the short barrel and the hard heel. She goes where men forget to look when they have guns in their hands. Nora uses the rock. She is there then, a foot to the right with no in-between. A soldier brings a bayonet down in a wide arc. She takes his wrist on the way and turns. The blade bites sand. She touches his throat with her knife and pulls back like cutting string. He sits down without deciding. The horses inside the canyon hit Nora's rawhide loops and go down to knees in a tangle. The dust eats their sight. The smoke eats their breath. The men haul on reins and lose balance. Ada takes one by the belt and pulls him into the rock at a run. His head hits stone with a sound that is not a word. Jack's eye finds the edge of danger like it knows the shape. A soldier on the ground uses a dead horse to sight on Cass. He has time for one careful shot. Jack breathes out and squeezes. The man's hat jumps. He goes flat. Jack cycles the next round and shifts an inch. Another soldier lifts his rifle toward Ruth's shelf, where the rope sits loose and bright. Jack shoots him in the shoulder, and the man spins firing into air, then disappears under his horse's hindquarters. There is a shout from outside the rock plug. Alden is sending men up and over boots, scrabbling at the red fingers, grabbing at seams. He keeps his own horse back from the mouth and slides off. He is on foot and moving along the outer skirt of rock toward the higher ground, where a goat track finds the ledge. Jeb trots behind hat low, looking for shadow to hide in. Jack tracks them through the scope and lets the crosshairs ride Jeb's chest. Jeb is looking up at the rim when the rifle speaks. His hat floats. His body folds at the waist and lies in the dust with the stupid surprise still on it. Alden does not look at him. He keeps moving steady like a man with one list he plans to finish by supper. Ada hears the scrape of boots on the goat track and looks up. The ledge runs toward the place where Ruth and Lila crouch. The captain is coming pistol-low, shoulders set. Jack shifts to get an angle and finds stone in the way. The notch cuts his view into pieces. He needs to stand. He does not think about it. He moves to his knees, then his feet, and leans out into open air over the shelf. The first bullet hits him before his sight is full. It bites his left shoulder, the same place the wood burned last week, and spins him into the rock. He catches himself on his bad arm and sees white. The rifle stays in his hands because old lessons live in joints, not just in brain. The sight picture clears for half a breath. Alden has his pistol raised, hard eye on Ada's back. Jack takes the slack out of the trigger and lets the last fraction go. The captain's head snaps, and then he is just a man with a broken string. He drops without drama. The pistol hits and kicks up dust. Jack breathes once, a broken sound, and slides back into the scrape before the next shot finds where he was. Below, the fight hiccups and then continues with a different rhythm. Men who came to chase shadows are trapped with them. They fire too high and too fast. Ben's arrows find the quiet places. Cass takes a long slice along her side when a bayonet catches her in a rush. She shouts once, face gone flat, and keeps firing with the other hand clamped over the cut. Ada gets to her and steps in front for 3 breaths long enough to finish the man and tip Cass behind a rock, where Ruth can reach when she can. The smoke pits do their slow work. Air goes dirty and thick. Men cough. Horses scream again, and then go silent as Nora moves among legs and straps with a knife that knows leather from flesh without looking. She cuts a cinch, and a man goes down with his saddle under him and all the wind knocked out of his chest. She leaves him there and takes the next knot. The 6 inside drop to 3, then 2, who throw their rifles clear and put their hands high, palms out, fingers spread, faces gray under dirt. Ada lets them live because the gun is now quiet. She pulls the rifles away with her boot and looks at their hands. They shake. She does not speak. She ties them with their own belts and pushes them toward the wall. From the rim, Jack waits. No one climbs again. Outside, the plug sound scatters from the rock. The men out there fire at echoes and get nothing back. The smell of powder rides the rising heat until it stings the nose. Silence comes wrong and sudden. The echoes let go. The dust settles in ribbons. The pattern of bodies is a rough map on the canyon floor. Ruth is already at Cass with a strip of shirt in both hands, pressing high and hard. Cass grins at her and winces and says a word in her own tongue that makes Ruth huff a laugh, despite the blood. Lila steps out from behind the stone where she hid when the smoke turned thick. She takes 3 slow steps, careful of the dead. Her bare toes touch powder. She looks at the captain where he lies on the ledge below the goat track and puts both hands to her mouth. She turns aside and retches into the dust. When there is nothing left, she sits with her face in her hands and rocks once. Jack watches and cannot make his legs answer yet. Ben gathers loose horses and leads them to the back of the canyon. He speaks low into ears still full of shout. The animals breathe his calm and follow. Nora picks through belts and cartridge boxes with brisk hands. She takes what will feed their guns and leaves the rest. She is not gentle and not cruel. She is exact. Ada climbs to Jack with a coil of rope over her shoulder and a face streaked with gray. She finds him half sitting, one hand on his shoulder, where the new hole burns. She sets her palm on his cheek and then on the cuff of his sleeve where Ruth's small stitches lie. She is not smiling. She is not frowning. She is here. "You stand tall," she says, and the words carry both scold and thanks. "Had to?" he says, voice thin. "Had to," she echoes and ties the bloody handkerchief tighter with a knot. He will not get undone alone. They work without talk because talk is empty air and work is weight. Ruth stitches Cass with the same clean path she used on Jack. Cass curses once, then laughs and bites the inside of her cheek until the thread is done. Ben and Nora drag the dead to the rockfall and roll them under where the slide will take more when it rains. They strip the coats before the bodies go and stack the blue cloth in a neat pile. Jack limps down and takes the captain's pistol and tucks it under a rock out of sight. Jeb Rollins is a lump with a hat beside him that is finally good for something. Jack does not kick the hat. They light the uniforms in a fire pit that smokes sweet and mean. Buttons pop, cloth twists and throws sparks, and then falls in on itself, black and then gray. The smell is sharp and stays in the nose. Lila watches from the wall with her hands on her knees and eyes that are older than her hands. Two soldiers still breathe and stand. Ada cuts their hands free and pushes a single horse toward them, with the rawhide end in the taller one's palm. She gives him a canteen with enough to wet a mouth and no more. He looks at her and at the rope and at the wall of rock that is now their gate. "Tell them what you saw," Nora says. Her voice is quiet. It fills the space anyway. "Tell them the canyon has ghosts." The men climb on with awkward legs and leave without a look back, because to look back is to see faces their sleep would bring later. The horse steps careful between stones and finds the open desert like a tired boat finds a harbor too small. The canyon floor is still. The smoke rises straight for the first time all day. Ruth wipes her hands on a cloth that does not come clean. She tilts water over Cass's side and holds the edges of the wound together while it runs pink. Cass sets her teeth and breathes through her nose and then breathes like herself again. Jack sits with his back to the wall, the Winchester across his knees. The stock is warm where his hand has been. His shoulder burns and then behaves inside the bandage Ada tied. He stares at the place where Alden fell and thinks of a list with one less line on it. Ada stands over him a moment and then lowers herself until their knees touch. She lays her hand on his chest and leaves it. He lets his hand cover hers. Ash drifts across the floor and settles into prints. The rope on the rim lies slack and frayed at the end. It's cut clean. The canyon holds its heat. The cloth slides down the rock and takes the shine with it. The air under the ledge cools and tastes like stone and sweat. They stay where they are until breath slows, until hands stop shaking, until the last thread of fire breaks into coal and then into gray. The canyon is quiet. The trap has sprung. What remains is theirs. Night moves in with a soft hand. The fire sinks to a ring. The canyon smells of iron and ash and wet stone. Jack sits with his back to the wall and lets the ache in his shoulder find a level he can live with. The Winchester rests across his knees. The wood is warm where his palm remembered to hold it. Ada kneels in front of him with a strip of clean cloth. She does not ask. She unties the bandage and sets the new one tight and flat. Her fingers work with a steadiness that keeps breath steady too. When she is done, she lays her palm on his chest and leaves it. The beat under her hand is simple and alive. Ruth tends Cass by the fire. The cut along Cass's side looks angry in the lamplight. Ruth presses cloth high and firm and hums a thin line. Cass clenches her jaw and lets the song distract her from the thread-biting skin. When Ruth knots the last stitch, Cass exhales, then laughs once because the laugh keeps the room from tipping. Ruth wipes her hands and hangs the needle on a string around her neck, the small bird carving resting against her collarbone. Nora sorts cartridges and belts into neat stacks. She puts what is useful close and what is not behind a rock where eyes will not trip on it. Ben strips a bridle and oils it with bacon grease, the leather soaking it up like a thirsty mouth. His shoulders loosen for the first time since he walked in from the junipers. Lila sits with her back to the painted wall. She has a new pot of color in her lap, the brown of old blood and good soil. She dips 2 fingers and draws a rope that loops around 7 small shapes. Not faces, not names, just a line that ties and does not choke. She adds a square of fire at the middle and gives it the soft edges of a cooking flame, not the wild reach of a burning house. She leans back and breathes on the paint to set it. The light licks across her cheeks and across the line of the rope. It looks like it could hold. Jack watches her work and feels something settle in him that the stitch and the bandage cannot do. He reaches for Ada's hand and places it on the rifle stock, the place that kept them alive today. Then he lifts her hand and sets it back on his chest. This he says. He does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. Ada's eyes meet his and soften at the edges. She nods once. They eat without talking much. Beans taste like salt and smoke and the end of fear. Coffee wears the smell of victory because it is hot and in a cup and in their hands. Ruth presses a tin cup into Jack's palm and fits the handle to his fingers as if she carved it for him. Cass drinks and holds the warm against her ribs. Nora does not sit. She drifts to the ledge and looks out at the dark where the desert is and the past is, and neither comes any closer. When the fire goes to coals, they make beds on the floor of the room and along the ledge just outside. Jack lowers himself to his mat. Ada lies at his right, the side that works her shoulder, tucked into his. Ruth lies at his left and rests her hand for a moment on the bandage she tied a seam laid straight. She leaves the hand there long enough for the heat of it to sink through to muscle. Jack's breath unwinds. He does not feel pulled apart. He feels held. Lila curls at the foot of the painted wall under a blanket that smells like yucca and sun. Cass sleeps with one hand open on the stone, as if holding a rope that is not there. Ben lies on his side facing his sister, his eyes finally shut all the way. Nora takes the doorway and turns her face to the canyon mouth, the scar on her cheek a pale hook, catching the last red from the coals. The night is a slow tide. The rock gives back its stored heat and then cools by inches. A small wind walks the ledge and lifts ends of hair and then lets them fall. Somewhere far down the basin, a coyote tries 2 notes and gives up. Jack sleeps. His dreams are only of breath. Ada does not move except to fit closer when he turns. Ruth's song picks itself up once in her throat and fades before it finds air. The world keeps quiet the way a room does when a baby is asleep. They wake early because the cold says so. The sky is all iron in the east, the rim dark against it. They climb the ledge path in a line and stand on the high lip where the canyon opens its mouth to the desert. Jack moves slow with the weight of fresh cloth on his shoulder. Cass holds her side and grins when the climb makes the stitches pull. Ruth ties the bird carving back at her throat where it belongs. Lila has charcoal on her fingertips and a smear of red at the edge of her ear. Ben looks taller now, that hunger has loosened its grip. Nora touches his elbow once. Ada stands with her hands loose at her sides, and her jaw set not in anger, only in possession. The first light reaches the far hills. It pours into the basin like honey from a high spoon. The red stone warms to gold a little at a time. Faces lift, scars light up, and then disappear in the new shine. The line of the rope Lila painted is a thought below. Up here, their shadows stand all in a row. Jack looks toward the far place where the cabin used to be. There is nothing to see there now but a scar that will be dirt by summer. He breathes in the cold and lets it all the way out. No smoke, he says. Not today, Ada says. Ruth rests her fingers on the small bird. The wood is warm from her skin. Enough for today, she says. Lila slips a bit of charcoal from her pocket and makes a bright dot on a flat stone at her feet, a mark small as a seed. We stay saved, she says very soft. The wind almost takes it. It does not. Nora angles her face to the sun and closes her eyes. Ben looks at his sister and then away and smiles without showing teeth. Cass tips her head back and pulls air into her chest, like it is something you can keep if you are clever. Jack turns to them and finds his place in that line without thinking where it is. He lifts his right hand and lets it hang open until Ada sets hers into it and Ruth covers both with her own. Nora adds hers a breath later. Cass clicks her tongue and stacks hers on the pile. Lila sets her small palm on top of all. Ben's hand is the last and slips between Jack's and Nora's like a stitch pulled through cloth. Warmth stacks, weight stacks. The knot is not a knot. It is a lay of hands. They stand like that until the cold is gone from their fingers and the day is real. Then they let go, because letting go is also part of living. They turn back toward the ledge. Steps find the path without a misstep. When they reach the room, the first smoke of breakfast holds low to the rock and slides away. Jack sits in the doorway with his legs out and the cup in his hand. The paint on the wall has dried. The rope circles the 7. The fire at the center is home, and not a warning. He reaches up and touches the edge of the line with one finger, as if checking a knot. He smiles in a way he has not since a winter that does not have to be named. Ada comes to stand behind him and sets her hand on the top of his head for a heartbeat, the way a woman might bless a child by passing touch into hair. Ruth hands him a spoon that fits. Cass laughs at something Ben says, in a voice that has learned to be easy again. Nora takes the first watch at the lip of the ledge, without looking like a guard. Lila adds a small curve to the fire on the wall so it looks more like the one in the room. The canyon breathes. Somewhere below water ticks into the stone bowl and makes a sound like time finding the right speed. Smoke hugs the ceiling and disappears. The rope coil at the door is dry and clean and ready if hands need it. Ash drifts onto the ledge and is brushed into the pot that carries dirt to the garden. Warmth is a fact. So are scars. They carry both. Jack lifts the cup. The coffee is strong and not sweet. He drinks. He sets the cup down where it will catch the light. He looks at the faces in the room and at the soft burn under the paint. He says it to the stone and to the air and to the hands that have touched him. I was alone, he says. Now I am yours. He does not look to see who answers. The room answers anyway. The sound is the scrape of a spoon in a pot, and a low laugh, and the breath of a woman who has decided to stay. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.